Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the VERSARIEN PLC investor presentation. Throughout the presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply click Q&A, scroll to the bottom, type your question and press send. Due to the number of investors attending today's presentation, the company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives. However, the company will review all questions both submitted today and ahead of the meeting and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via Investor Meet Company dashboard, and you'll be notified by email once they're ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Neil Ricketts, CEO, Chris Lee, CFO, and Stephen Hodge, CTO. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I see that we've received a number of questions and we're going to try our best to answer those as we go through, so thanks for that. We'll answer as many questions as possible as we go through the presentation. There tends to be quite a theme as we go through, so hopefully we'll be able to answer more than one question at a time and we'll be able to get the meeting on time. If you could submit your questions individually rather than putting them in multiple questions, that just makes our life a little bit easier. But let's get on with the presentation for tonight. So if we can move on, we'll get to the point where we're explaining what our intent is. This is what the company is really aiming to do. So the way that we see it now is that we're here to solve some of the biggest problems using the widest portfolio of two-dimensional materials. Now, obviously, the company is very, very focused as it stands at the moment in terms of graphene. But there's a lot of themes that run through what we're being asked about by our customers. It doesn't matter whether it's recyclability, it's longer life of components, it's the reduction of fossil-based plastics. It could also be anything from reducing the maintenance and improving the performance of most items that we see. We've got a lot of questions which kind of revolve around this kind of intent and what we're intending to do. So what we'll, you can just hear a little boy in the background there, one of the joys of working from home. But one of the questions that was asked was, has my view or the view of the company changed over the market needs and what the commercial value of high quality materials are, especially these graphene materials? And for me, no, nothing has changed. In fact, it's become a lot clearer around this intent to supply the market as we stand. In terms of our manufacturing, there was another question which was around, what is our manufacturing strategy and our investment model? Well, that varies depending on the sector and the application that we're working on. It was asked in the question, whether we're looking at regionally owned or centralized sites, and I think there's a mixture of both that will be required as we move forward. There's also a question about why, would we generate our sales directly or would we generate those through licenses and royalty? And we're already in some royalty agreements around the world where it doesn't make sense to have manufacturing. It's far better for our customers to have that manufacturing. So for us, it's a mixture of real strategies depending on what the customer really needs. We could see everything from mega factories through to highly distributed models depending on the sector and the type of application. We had a question here about major innovation grants that have been awarded and what products are coming from these. Well, the presentation is going to focus on our two real hot topics at the moment, which is construction and textiles, but we'll also explain some of the things that have come through from the G-Scale Innovate loan. And I'm pleased to say that the performance there is actually better than I would have anticipated personally, and we're seeing quite a lot of progress. I think every business needs a little bit of luck, and our bit of luck here is that we're very, very closely aligned to changes that are happening in society. This core belief that we have a solution to a lot of individual products. In terms of which products have the most potential, as I said, the company is currently focusing on the textile industry, where Steve will be able to highlight some of the real big changes that are happening, some of the scientific evidence, but also in the construction industry. A question here that came in, and I'm sure that Chris might have a view on this, how has the recent events around COVID, Brexit, Chinese relationships, energy price hikes, the budget affected your business? Well, these are all challenges that every business has to go through at the moment, and I think we've weathered the storm very well. We've had our head down. We've been concentrating on what is really important for the business, these core themes as part of the G-Scale and the DSTL project. And we've not gone backwards, we've actually gone forwards. We've expanded Steve's team and we've expanded our footprint to include South Korea and the US. So for me, these are challenges. They're very big challenges, but they're challenges which the company has kind of overcome. If we move now on to the business process, I think it's important for investors to understand exactly how we manage the business. In terms of what as it stands at the moment, we're not going out too much actively looking for work. We're overwhelmed by customers coming to us. We're developing a very good name in the projects that we're working on with very, very high profile global companies that like what we do. We've aligned ourselves with central government so that we have a huge amount of credibility, but we also have a very, very good foundation in our footprint with the University of Manchester and the University of Cambridge. In terms of how we move through this process, it's not a straight line. I think investors always like to see binary outcomes, but the reality is the world's not like that. It's quite likely that in some cases we can move straight from inquiry to order, like the samples that are being generated in South Korea, or for standardized products. Other products and other projects take much longer. They have to go through a series of regulation. They have to go through a series of iteration where we might not have the solution, or we might be able to optimize that solution as we move through. In order, some of the questions that we had in this kind of area, what are the key things that need to happen for VERSARIEN to deliver material commercial revenues? It's very much about getting through this kind of journey that we have to go through. As I say, some of those move very quickly and some of those move a lot slower. The aircraft industry, in my experience, has always moved much slower than other industries. But that's why we have to have a portfolio of different customers and different projects in order to make sure that we can fill those gaps. In some cases, we might need to take the lead and we might need to show customers what they can achieve. And we're doing that with some of our clients as well. We're not able, unfortunately, in this presentation, or ever, in fact, to talk about forecasts and budgets. Those come as part of a research note or a broker note. And we're actively involved at the moment to try and get one of those research notes out. And of course, investors will be some of the first to receive that research. So some of the questions that try to put deadlines or timing on, unfortunately, we're not able to answer just because of the rules of the market. But we'll try to, the easy answer to any of those questions is nothing ever happens quick enough. We're all under huge amounts of pressure to achieve things as timely as we can and as effectively as we can. And that is always in the back of our minds. A question here that was directed at me was, Neil Ricketts has been an inspirational driver in pushing the case for graphene. What, if anything, might cause him to change his mind? Well, nothing has come across my desk that makes me think that graphene is not going to be used in almost everything that we deal with. In fact, I'm due to go to Barcelona in the next week or so for the Puzzle X exposition out there. And I'm pretty sure that I'll get energized by some of the new applications which are coming around that kind of really do make you wonder what the limits are. Question about collaborations, and this is around the business model itself. The reality is we're too big now to individually go through every single collaboration. There's a lot of people working on these projects. It was much easier when there was only 2 or 3 of us. But the reality is we're working with a lot of projects and a lot of collaborations, and it's not ever going to happen that we're going to report on every single collaboration. I'm not aware of anything that's fallen over for a technical reason. Things change in life, people move on to other roles, companies close down. But that just gives you an opportunity to reflect on what you're doing and look for other opportunities. So as far as I'm concerned, the collaborations are still as relevant as ever. And I'm pretty sure that if we develop our projects such as G-Scale, then we'll be able to go back and talk to other people who may have a different focus at the moment. What we're seeing, a question that came in was, the issue of moving from lab to pilot scale. And you'll be aware there's a slide later on about our footprint and how we're concentrating on graphene. But we're actively involved in that scale up. And that's, in fact, why the government selected us to benefit from this £5 million innovation loan from Innovate UK to actually scale up our production facilities. We're pretty guarded about who we show those facilities to, but I'm sure that at some stage investors will be able to get an idea of exactly what's going on. But all of our core graphene production methods are all being scaled up at the moment. And I was in the factory just an hour before this meeting. And it's interesting to see how you start with an empty shell of a building and move on to filling that space quite quickly. A question that came in was about anticipating from our shareholders these milestone events. Again, if you look at this journey that we're on, some of those are could eventually become supply contracts, but they're more likely to be orders, as we would see in lots of our other businesses. And another part of that question, it was in terms of barriers. And I think that we've built up a significant barrier to entry for anybody coming into this market through the work that Steve and his team have done over the last 2 or 3 years, where we have been able to demonstrate that we can take this technology from a fume cupboard to an industrial site and starting to get very reasonable levels of production. If we can move on, we'll kind of get on to what our footprint currently looks like, and you can see how the business has transitioned from being very manufacturing orientated, with our production facilities where they were producing relatively mundane products, to being very focused around our graphene production. We have obviously sales opportunities and sales facilities in the US and China, but we now have production facilities in South Korea as well as in the UK, and research not only in Europe but also in the UK. We can move on there. As I spoke to you about, very fortunate to have been able to find a site that could accommodate our expansion. The reason for that expansion was not only being able to develop our capacity and our capability in inks, but in graphene nanoplatelets, but also our Spanish assets. Obviously, moving plant and equipment during the pandemic was difficult, but we managed to achieve that, and that equipment now is being commissioned, set up in that new site, and we'll have moved from 2,000 square feet to almost 18,000 square feet, with another 10,000 square feet identified for either production or the innovation center that we require. I know that some of our shareholders like to have a drive-by of our facilities to make sure that we're being busy bees in our factory, and the steel work has actually just gone up this week, so we're starting to see the skin of the innovation center starting to develop. But I think that shows you a story where we've moved from this 2,000 square feet to almost 28,000 square feet when that facility is commissioned. It's planned to be complete in the first quarter of next year. So these things do take time. The slab that the building will sit on will be a graphene reinforced slab, complete with graphene reinforced polypropylene fibers and no steel work in the base. So for us, that's a really good demonstrator to be able to bring people along and show them exactly what we're going to achieve with this new technology. In terms of some of the questions, I've already answered the question about the parts from Spain being delivered and they're being set up. My very good friend and colleague, John Tatlow, I've worked with for a long time, is tasked with getting that up and running as quickly as we can. We have now 2 shifts running in order to sweat the assets that we have as best we can. That fluctuates depending on demand and also the supply of materials. As I said to you previously, this is not an easy time to run a business at the moment. We do see issues with the supply chain occasionally, issues with delivery both in and out of factories, but they're kind of problems that we have to overcome. Question here about looking at the scale up and the recycling of additives. Well, we work hand in hand with our suppliers. It's always part of our business model to develop the process equipment as well as the chemicals that go in there, so that that's eventually what we are selling. And as such, we work with them to scale as and when it's appropriate. So that's going well as far as I'm concerned. Question here is a key challenge for this sector is the scalability of graphene production to meet future anticipated demand. Unfortunately, there are no crystal balls. We've got to take advice from our customers and our clients. What we do know is that the scale that is required if all of this comes to fruition is quite staggering, and so we need to take that into account. It goes back to the statement I made earlier about, we're not sure whether it will be a single site or a distributed model that we work on. We had a question mark over, bonuses and providing Teslas to our employees. Well, my answer to that is we want the very best people that we can to take on this journey. Whenever I get on the plane, I never ask how much we're paying the pilot. I always take it that he's getting a fair rate and that he's the best in his job. But for us, it's about looking after our employees, making sure our employees are motivated and in a good place. And we are also, because this is a new science, having to develop our own employees. So that goes all the way from apprentices through our production people and up into our senior management. So it's an important part of our ethos to make sure that we also reduce the impact of what we're doing. So we actually have a head of sustainability, Paul Denny, now, and his job is to work on the projects for our customers that are sustainability related, but also to look inward as well and to see how we kind of get on with those things that are important for the environment. There's a question mark in here about we've updated on the number of engagements. That was 2019. That's just probably not going to happen. I have done it for the overseas facilities because they're much younger, much easier to manage. But for the PLC to be able to update on every single engagement, unfortunately, we'd probably be here for a week. So we're going to try and concentrate and highlight the ones which are most appropriate. Chris, could you just take over for a second and talk us through the financial highlights? I just get a drink.
Yes, of course, and good afternoon, everyone. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. We've got here the financial highlights from the 31st of March 2021. I'm sure investors will have seen those in the annual report. And really, I just wanted to concentrate on the sort of cash at bank and the headroom and the burn rate for the business as it stands, or as it stood. I can't give any forecasts, as Neil has said, because we're just simply not allowed to do so, but very happy to refer to the information that is in the public domain. We can see by looking at the group statement of cash flows at the year end that on average our monthly cash burn is about 0.3 million. We also know from looking at the balance sheet and the information in the annual report that at the year end we had bank balances of 2.4 million. We had headroom on our invoice finance facilities of 0.7 million. Just post the year end, we announced that Graphene Labs had taken some shares in VERSARIEN, which provided another 1.9 million. And we also stated at the year end the balance owing on the Innovate UK loan, which was 2.3 million, which means that there was another 2.7 million yet to draw. So in total, that gives us about 7.7 million that we have available to us compared to a monthly cash burn rate of 0.3 million. So I'll leave you to do the maths on that. But in addition to that, we also have the proceeds from the 2 Lansted sharing agreements, which aren't due to end until first quarter, second quarter of next year. And they provide the majority of cover for the historic burn rate of 0.3 million. So, hopefully you can see we're in a fairly good position as far as that's concerned. You may recall that the loan repayments for Innovate UK, capital repayments, don't start until May 24, so that's also a little way off yet. We had a few questions, which I'll attempt to answer as best I can. The first was, how have your capital allocation decisions changed over the last couple of years? Well, they really are now concentrated on most things to do with G-scale. So that's where our focus is, and that's where the CapEx is in principle going, whether it's plant and machinery or all the good work that's being done that Steve and his team are doing on intangible assets. We were asked how much of the G-scale loan has been drawn at the present time. Well, I think probably the easiest thing is just to wait for the interim report, which will be published in the next few weeks, and that'll give the factual information as at 30th September. We were also asked how long the current funding is likely to last. Again, I've just referred back to the burn rate and the headroom that we've got, 7.7 million plus the Lansdowne proceeds, and leave you to sort of draw your own conclusions from that. There was also a question about a share tipping website and us sounding out institutions in London for a £30 million fundraise. Well, I'm sure you've all seen that we issued an RNS in response to that, which rebutted that. And of course, the fact of the matter is the shareholders at the AGM granted us authority to place roughly 30 million shares without preemption rights, which is nowhere near the 30 million that that particular share site was talking about. And finally, we were asked whether we'd done any pitches to public market investors in the US, and the simple answer to that is no. If and when the time were right, then perhaps it's something we might consider. But again, given the position that we're in financially, there is no need for us to start sort of tapping into that market. So hopefully that's answered most of the questions that came in from a financial perspective.
There was just one last one, Chris, which was around Berenberg, and they obviously came on board as a second broker at the time to our broker, Canaccord. I think it's fair to say that we've done in the past a number of meetings with them, including going to Ibiza and seeing some European investors take on positions in the on the share register. So as far as I'm concerned, Berenberg are still doing a good job for us, and they're still going to continue as our second broker. We are on the markets for the reason of raising capital when it's appropriate. Although I think it's fair to say that at the moment we're not sounding out anything, and we put that in the RNS that went out. So I think we can draw a line underneath that now. Thank you, Chris. That's a good update, and enabled me to have a quick drink. I'm still feeling a bit croaky there. If we could move on to the next slide about carbon fiber developments. I'm going to do the first bit of this, and then Steve's going to do the more technical bit. So I put on there the first product that we were involved in, which was the Richard Mille watch. I think it's interesting to reflect that just a few years ago, it would have taken us a month to create a kilo of material, and now we can do far greater quantities than that in much shorter times. But what we're aiming at here is, and what we're seeing from our customers, is that graphene has a part to play in carbon fiber, especially around transport. And that's driven by the need to lightweight structures as we move more towards electrification. But also, we've seen that this is a big market which is continuing to develop, not only in the automotive industry, but in the aerospace industry. And if we move on, Steve, do you want to give us some technical details about what that looks like?
Sure. So if we can go to the next slide, as Neil's pointed out, we've got a growing R&D team. This is a particular highlighted project that we've worked on over the last 18 months, working with several supply chain partners. And what we're aiming to do is to look at the one of Lotus's components. In this particular case, it's the carbon fiber bonnet, looking at how much weight we can take out of that, and also not just look at lightweighting, but can we save costs in other parts of the process? Can we look at new manufacturing processes? And so this is a really good example where we've had sort of three targets we've taken on, looking at lightweighting, trying to meet Lotus's paint quality specifications, and also looking at taking out cost from the whole process. And so working with partners such as the AMRC, one of the UK's catapults, we've really taken this product and demonstrated that we can meet all of these three targets. And in terms of the cost, we're now looking to further take another 15% out of that if we can. But again, over the last 18 months, we've really developed our internal know-how, how to disperse graphene into different resin systems, working with other supply chain partners to incorporate graphene into the carbon fiber matrix, and then look at a combined result with graphene, further enhancing that already quite nice and stiff structure. Neil, back to you for the commercials.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the sectors and the types of clients that we're working with, these are very large organizations compared to Versarion. We've got Airbus that Steve's team's working on through a graphene flagship project. That's a very large project. Feedback from Airbus has been very good. We're creating a name as a safe pair of hands for this development, and that can only be a good thing when you think about how graphene could potentially be used within the aircraft industry. But it will be a slow burner compared to some of the other industries. At the other end of the scale, we have Westfield, which is about the same size as Versarion in terms of people, and they're developing automated pods and automotive products, which means that they're slightly quicker to market than some of these bigger companies. At the other end of the scale in automotive, we have Lotus, although not one of the biggest producers, a sizable producer, and backed heavily by the Chinese. And so for us, this means that within carbon fiber composites, we've got a vast range of people that we can work with at different rates and really develop this technology, which came from that initial 1 kilo batch that we supplied 2 or 3 years ago. In terms of technology, this is quite a fast route to market compared to, say, the development of some other materials. And I know it can't happen quick enough for any of us, but the reality is that we need to have a portfolio of products that can be used by different people at different rates. Right, moving on to construction. This is a huge sector. Every day is a learning day, as they say. If you think about the number of roads just in the UK is 250,000 miles, and over 24.7 million tons of ready-mix concrete is used in the UK. These are huge markets that would benefit from reducing their environmental footprint. Concrete, we've been working on for a number of years now, but I thought it was going to be a slower burner than what it's turned out to be. We've seen that there's been quite a lot of kind of regulation and an environmental push to try to get concrete to behave. It's kind of on the naughty step. And so anything that can be done to reduce the CO2 that's used is well welcome at the moment. What we have here is we're working with a number of large organizations, some government, some non-government, in order to bring this technology to market as quickly as we can. Steve, do you want to move on to the technical opportunities there?
Absolutely. So in terms of some of the key results we've seen, really driven by graphene actually providing a reinforcing and also changing the porosity of the cementitious composite. So what we end up with is a unique structure with improved compression strength. So in the typical, what we call type 1 cement, we've seen improvements up to around 40%, and also flexural has been improved. One of the key factors in construction is obviously the use of steel reinforcement, the additive and coatings that are further applied to reduce things like water permeability. And so actually adding graphene, we can try to remove some of these other additional coatings. We can try to remove some of the additional reinforcement. And that's really stemmed from graphene not only changing the mechanicals, but also changing the thermal properties of the concrete. So one of the key challenges in the industry is because it's a chemical reaction taking place, giving out heat. Concrete's got a very poor thermal conductivity. So what happens is you get localized hotspots that leads to cracking of the structure. And we've been really pleasantly surprised by seeing that with graphene, we get significantly reduced and in cases, no cracking at all, which means no top coat, improving the corrosion resistance and overall reducing the costs of some of these projects. And as Neil mentioned, with COP26 and UK government targets of reaching net zero by 2050, the construction sector's got a real part to play and one of the key contributors to CO2 emissions. So we're seeing every day new opportunities arising from some of the world's biggest companies. Neil, I'll pass back to you for going through some of the commercials?
Yeah, so we've got a variety of different models that we're working with. We're working with Nationwide Engineering, as you know, on their concretine. They own that trademark. But we have our own trademark, cementine, which is being used with our inks with other manufacturers. They say you should never choose a favorite child, but concrete is becoming my favorite child within the VERSARIEN portfolio. And as such, that's where the company is focusing. In terms of where we're deploying this, we're working with LEPs and county councils around highways because they hold the purse strings for this 250,000 miles of road in the UK. But we're also working with non-government bodies responsible for sea defence and flood defence, and also HS2. HS2 has some unique challenges, some that don't have a solution at the moment, other ones that we can really help in the speed of getting those initial stages done. You know, the building of pre-built train stations and toilet blocks and things like this are all required way ahead of when the main structure is actually put in place. But we're also looking at things like light railway and some of the other areas of real growth within the rail industry. There were a couple of questions around, asking us to specifically talk about recent news around concrete. We try to put out everything we can through the various channels. In most cases, we're not leading. The organization that is responsible for that project will lead. You'll see on the slide that there's a couple of pictures of the robot that we've purchased, which will be used in these projects. And in projects where we're taking the lead, then we have more latitude. So currently, if you look at these structures I already mentioned, there's a utilities company at the moment that's looking for 56 stations that need toilet convenience blocks. Not the most exciting thing you would imagine, but actually it's a way of being able to demonstrate the technology in a very low risk way. And we've already received the first task order for that prior to actually receiving the machine. So we're up against it, as we always are. We need the machine in, which is due in imminently, and then we need to get it working and get it satisfying this initial order so that we can demonstrate that the technology works and has a viable place in those projects. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, which is the other project areas in which we're working with concrete. We've got wind turbine bases in Europe, flooring screed, working with large residential builders around rafts. I've already mentioned the very light railway structures, and there's a brand new innovation centre been opened up in Dudley that we're working with to be able to demonstrate how we can use these structures to not impact on the general running of the railways. So we can do this and lift this straight onto site without necessarily having to close the line down. But the highways in terms of slip form and also the water industries are also very, very interested. So you can see that we've got a lot of opportunity, a very, very large market to go after, and potentially a unique solution to it. So for us, that's the ideal scenario. Okay, if we move now on to...
Do you want to play the video, Neil?
Yes, sorry, I forgot about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Paul, I think that's enough for today. I think the next stage for us is to actually be able to demonstrate this to our shareholders. So at some stage, we would very much like to be able to invite shareholders along to see this in operation. Maybe you might want to place an order for a home office or something that we're also designing at the same time. Okay, moving on to polymers. Kind of got a bit ahead of myself there. Again, this is very related to the COP26 event that's going on at the moment. We know that we can't carry on doing what we're doing. To a certain extent, COVID actually made that situation worse through the use of single-use masks. But we know that there's already 3.3 million tons of plastic processed in the UK alone. Once you start scaling that up across Southeast Asia and the Americas, you can see that this is a big challenge to overcome. I don't think in the future that we'll be able to use plastic in the way that we can. And so Paul is working on alternatives to plastic. Steve's team is working on how we get the most out of the plastics that we can already use. And I'm sure he's going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But we're working with some of the largest packaging companies, which really have the biggest task ahead. And so for us, we've got again an ideal solution in an ideal area with a very big market. Steve, do you want to just run us through the technical parts of that?
Sure. So again, just to give a highlight of one of our particular projects, and again, this is really driven by commodity plastics, which we throw away on a daily basis, or we try to recycle as much as we can. But the true nature of plastics is that the more we recycle, the kind of more degraded they become, and they have to go into a lower value product. And so what we want to do by adding graphene is get the most out of these plastics, use less to begin with. So can we maintain the same strength plastic bottle by adding a small pinch of graphene to that mixture? And also, can we then recycle it more and more times into the same product? So not degrading its properties as a function of the recycling. So we've been working over the last couple of years with two big customers on lightweighting plastic containers, and we've seen quite impressive results. We've achieved 20% lightweighting, but now we're looking at how we fit into these supply chains. So, again, getting out of the lab into the real world, scaling up into larger scale facilities where we can actually demonstrate production of graphene, high concentrated graphene master batches. And so what we're doing now is having to develop those methods that go alongside quality control, quality assessment, to make sure that when we do produce high loaded graphene master batches, we can get the same performance as if we were doing sort of a small pinch of graphene in the final container. And also we need to make sure that when we add graphene to plastics, they can still be processed using conventional equipment and injection molding machines or blow molding machines, and also then provide confidence to those downstream supply partners that graphene is not going to cause them any problems. It's going to behave in the same way as their typical plastics. So that's really interesting. And aside from these commodity plastics, we're obviously looking at higher value engineering and specialty plastics for multifunctional applications. So not just looking at mechanical properties, but also thermal interface materials and thermal management materials are becoming increasingly important for the automotive and aerospace sectors. And so we are working on a whole number of streams in this area. So Neil, I'll pass back to you for some of the commercials on the polymer.
Thanks, Steve. I noticed that we're quickly running out of time here, so we need to get a bit of a move on, team. There's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of activity. So I'm not going to spend too much time on here. We've seen the AMSU device produced by Airways, a very good way of us being able to demonstrate a range of technologies, but we're also involved in everything from optical wear through to containers and packaging materials that are coated films or blown films. So there's a lot of activity in this area. There was a question came in, I just managed to be able to glance at the other screen, around the Arch. The Arch was a project with AECOM and has TfL as a final customer. At the moment, that project is on hold, and until I think the situation changes with the number of people using the transport. But obviously, we'd obviously like that project to continue. It was a great way of demonstrating our technology, and a lot of these applications now use the technology that came out of that project. So let's have a look at textiles, the next sector that we're going to look at, and let's try and move along a bit. what we have here is another one of my favorite children. Textiles is a large market for us to go at. In the UK, it's worth about 5.8 billion, which I found quite staggering. It has its challenges around sustainability, but also all the textile manufacturers are looking for the next thing. So what we've been doing over the last couple of years is being able to demonstrate how graphene makes a big difference. And this is very much a kind of phased approach. The first phase is very much about printing onto the fabrics and changing the thermoregulation. I'm actually wearing one of the tops today and benefiting from its thermoregulation. We've had a lot of evidence to show that the benefits are real and that they can be mapped, and Steve's going to talk about those in a second. There were a couple of questions around, do we have a focus here? Yes, Bobby is working on that alongside David, so we have some dedicated resource. In terms of graphene wear, well, that's been kind of superseded. We thought we might have to do some stuff ourselves, but in fact, the clients are moving quicker than I'd anticipated. So as far as I'm concerned at the moment, we'll continue to work alongside the clients. Graphene wear is a brand that we anticipate being co-located on the garments, very much in the same format as, say, Gore-Tex or Lycra. And so graphene wear, as soon as it's got its scientific data from the University of Gloucestershire, then I'll be working with the team to get that website up with all of the data that we can, so that we can continue to sell that into large brands. There's a question about masks. We've been working with the Health and Safety Executive to get our KN95 masks through the various channels. We've learned an awful lot about regulation on PPE over the last year or so. There was a slightly different kind of set of rules during the pandemic, and as we came out of that in kind of March, April this year, the rules changed, not helped by Brexit and the change away from CE and CA marks and different standards and so on. But I'm pleased to be able to say that we've now worked with multiple parts of the HSE to be able to get those masks here. The issue, for those who wanted to know, was that we've created a reusable mask which doesn't necessarily fit into one of the boxes, because most FFP2 masks, which is the kind of fancy name for the mask that we produce, are not recyclable, and so that caused us some challenges as we introduce a new product into the market. Steve, do you want to just give us some insights into the technical aspects of the textiles?
Yep, sure. So essentially what we have going on with textiles, we've got three phases, each of them running in parallel. But as Neil mentioned, the first focus has been on printing and coating onto textiles, and that's using our graphene ink products. And so we've moved from the first generation, where we actually completely dyed the fabrics. We moved on to printing in certain areas, and now we're optimizing and modifying those designs such that we can really push forward and optimize the kind of trade-off between the thermal management and moisture wicking and the breathability of these garments. So, our customers are always wanting new generations of textiles. They want seasonal collections of clothing, and so that's why we see this as a kind of continual development over the next foreseeable future, starting with graphene, looking at maybe other two-dimensional materials that can offer other potential benefits. And alongside that, we are working on textile yarns. So that's where we've got graphene embedded inside the polymer yarns, working with polyesters and polyamides. And so that's more focused towards mechanical reinforcement. So again, one of the key issues with the textile sector is kind of degradation of clothing and shedding of microfibers, which again can cause some environmental issues. So we're really looking here at, can we improve, and we have demonstrated quite significant improvements of mechanical performance of yarns. And we're now going towards really kind of, as I say, moving out of the lab into pilot scale production and demonstrating. A year ago, we were making fibers which were sort of 100 microns in diameter. Now we're down to sort of 3 or 4 microns. And also we're making non-woven fabrics from those non-woven mats, as well as the traditional woven textiles. And alongside this, and underpinning everything that we do, is really the all analysis of the scientific data. What effect do these graphene garments have on final performance? And I think that's where a lot of other companies don't really demonstrate what their garments are actually doing. They sort of using graphene as a marketing tool, but we are really seeing some real key benefits. And later on, we have a lot of customers who are interested in future wearables and wireless monitoring, sensing of people and health from young babies to elderly people. So again, we've got a whole supply chain here, different supply chains for each of these different phases as well, and strong collaborations we've developed with many universities and commercial partners.
Thanks, Steve. And in terms of the sectors that we're looking at, let me just change my own screen. We've got obviously the civilian clothing, the base layers that were sold last year were demonstrators to be able to get out there. I can reliably inform you that they've had a very positive, we've had some very positive feedback about that. But we've also been able to demonstrate to the military around the use of this technology in everything from the most mundane parts of uniform through to some of the more specialist stuff. But it also has a part to play in improving performance for Olympians, the fire service, and even our police force. So a really key thing to be involved in, and a really large market to go at, especially if you can show that it has a real scientific advantage rather than necessarily just that marketing advantage that Steve talked about. Okay, the last one of my my graphene children is elastomers. So elastomers are the rubber type products that we use, everything from the soles of your shoes through to the tires on your car. And it's a big market to go at. It's a relatively traditional industry. Not a lot's really happened in it for a long time, and now we're coming along and challenging what needs to be done as a result of things like the COP26 that we spoke about earlier, but also the requirement from consumers and from manufacturers to get better performance out of what is, one of the last kind of black arts really in terms of automotive and aerospace. It's a big market, $440 billion US dollars by 2026, and contains everything from seals and parts for the oil and gas industry through to parts for the electric vehicles. So if we move on, we'll talk specifically about the technical benefits, Steve.
Yeah, and again, as Neil mentioned, two key focus areas here: EV tires, and in our recent white paper, we stated, and it's a massive environmental problem, is that there are actually more emissions now coming from tires than there are from actual vehicle fuel emissions. And that's really drawn and driven by the abrasion and wearing of tires, and again the leaching of microplastics and other materials. And so the key challenge here is, can we improve the abrasion resistance without affecting any of the other properties? So, for EV tires, again, a key issue is because of the high torque and the high massive weight of the batteries involved. So some of these batteries can weigh up to about 600 kilos. You're getting a huge amount more wear, and so that's why we're designing specific EV compounds. And again, graphene is not just one material that works in every application. We've had to significantly modify our graphene, and we've actually found our new Spanish graphene material is providing much better abrasion resistance than our nanine or GMP HP grade material. So it's finding the right balance between the type of graphene, the chemistry of the graphene, and how that interacts with these rubber compounds and other additives. So they're very, very complex formulations. And again, in the footwear, using different types of graphene, you can get a whole host of benefits, significant improvements in tensile strength and modulus, and also at the same time improving the elongation and tear strength. So having a much more robust compound that will last longer and keep the customers happy, and again have a much less environmental impact down the line.
Thanks, Steve. In terms of the sectors, we've already spoke quite extensively about the types of people that we're working with. These are not the only people that we're working with. These are just the ones that we've highlighted. it's we tend to use these companies as demonstrators to be able to show other companies exactly what the benefits are. And when you start seeing significant improvements like Steve just highlighted, that gets people very, very excited. So moving quickly on to our global footprint. We're not only a UK company. We're obviously headquartered in the UK and supported by the UK government, but we have facilities out in Spain run by Roberto. And as I say, I'll be out there next week talking to the guys out there about the future plans, and we'll be able to show you what's going on there. We also have Brian out in the US. It's a big area and a lot of opportunities out there that we need to sift through. We have Bruno in China, and we have obviously our new team in South Korea that we'll talk a little bit about as well. So in terms of the US, which is the next slide we have in our presentation, we've got, I did highlight that at the beginning of the presentation that we tell you exactly all the things that we're on about. We currently have 22 NDAs in place, 14 active projects, 5 collaboration agreements. Each one of those collaboration agreements is quite a handful, to be honest, and they range everything from coating and anti-corrosion, the world leaders in that in the US, through to packaging and bottling, very similar to the UK opportunities, as well as things like the elastomers and the thermal transfer fluids. So quite a lot going on for Brian out in the US, and we obviously support him from our UK team. But if we move now on to South Korea, we have obviously our new facilities out there, which we'll show you in a second. We have now have over 100 patents in 29 families relating to graphene. We also have a state-of-the-art facility. So if we move on to the next slide, you'll be able to see that Steve's just come back from South Korea, where he's been out with the Korean team. The assets are all co-located with our partners, Graphene Lab, who use the graphene that we produce in their applications, things like sensors and so on. And while Steve was there, the clean room was actually commissioned. All of that equipment has been moved from the Hanwha facility where we purchased it and been set up, and is now operational. And our first samples were actually made this month, which is quite a milestone for us. It's quite a complicated process and quite a significant challenge to get back up and running, but that's now been successfully done. So we're now in a position where the South Korean team can actually start to supply parts to and samples to people like academic facilities and customers. And then we'll move on to Spain. So in Spain, obviously, Roberto and his team there have been working on developing these hybrid materials using graphene as a scaffold, and then building on from that. They're involved in a whole range of different activities, everything from batteries and supercapacitors through biocidal materials, which we've been able to successfully prove work in the fight against these dreaded viruses that we're suffering from. But also military applications like EMI shielding and sensors, very similar to what's going on in South Korea, but using a completely different technology and a different base. They also modify some of the inks that we create, adding different metallic signatures to give them different properties, so hopefully that's giving you a little bit more flavor. Some people have asked, how's Nanomap doing? Well, it's working with a range of customers, including Skeleton. There's not a commercial product yet, as we said when we bought it in 2018, I think it was, that it would take some time to get those to market. But you'll have seen more recently, and I'm going to get Steve to talk a little bit more about this. We were successful in a collaborative project with Innovate around supercaps, which not only in this particular application are for port infrastructure, but have a much wider impact. Steve, do you want to tell us a bit about Supportive?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully most of you have seen the news. So it's going to be a great case study where we can we can take some of Nanomap's best candidates, so some of the materials they're currently scaling up, and look at those in aqueous-based systems and compare them against conventional electrode geometries. And what we're really hoping to do is create a demonstrator in the marine environment that can then be applied to potentially Westfield sports cars, and also other ports are already taking notice of the work that we've started. So it's quite a short, intense project of 7 or 8 months. Hopefully, we'll be finished by the end of this financial year. And so we're not spending too much time optimizing anything. We're taking those materials that have already been optimized. They've got good electrochemical energy storage properties, and really scaling those up with other partners such as the Geek and the CPI to stack these cells and enable us to power these ships.
In terms of the team that's out there, we've expanded the team out there. We now have 4 PhDs working predominantly in energy storage, but obviously involved in the scaling up of that technology. They're based in Madrid. And if we move on to the next slide, we'll be able to see some of the applications that we're working on. Obviously, supercaps we've talked about with Steve just a second ago. But they're also involved in things like zinc air batteries, alkaline fuel cells, and a range of other energy applications, which also is very, very connected to the COP26 type applications. So that pretty much concludes what we wanted to talk about today. There's probably about 3 minutes left of the allotted time. There was a question, Steve, about reach. I wonder if you could potentially just bring us up to speed about reach.
Yeah, so for those of you that are familiar with our REACH registration, so this is European regulation that's essential once you manufacture and you want to export over 1 ton of material into the European region. We've had Brexit, which has meant that now UK has their own UK REACH registration, which we have transferred across, and we now have both registrations. Once we want to set up manufacturing in Korea, for example, there's a Korean REACH to apply for as well. And in other territories such as America, there's different regulations that we need to follow. So I don't see this as a particular hindrance. It's a process that we are going through with other graphene manufacturers and kind of supporting each other to build the markets and support each other with some of the costs involved in terms of the required testing, nanomaterial safety and toxicology testing. So it's kind of taking the responsibility, taking the lead in terms of making sure that we're not producing, manufacturing and selling products that could be potentially classed as hazardous one day. We've not seen any indication that graphene is toxic in any way. But it gives our customers and supply chain partners that confidence that, we're giving them a material that they can handle safely, and it can be integrated into their products without any issues. So, Neil, I don't think if you've got anything else you want to add there, but I would say, we're also leading and kind of pioneering the technical working group, which means making sure that every other company is on the same page as us and characterizing materials in the same way, in line with some of the new graphene standards that are coming out, and more graphene standards are supposedly going to be published by ISO in the coming years.
There was one last question, was how many employees have we got, Chris? I don't know if you got that information to hand. I haven't got it to hand.
Yes, it's roughly 100.
Seem to be expanding the team and getting far more productivity out of the people that we have got. So that's good.
Fantastic. Guys, we're just coming up to the hour. So to Neil, Chris, Stephen, thank you indeed for the update and covering a number of investors' questions during the presentation. Just to remind investors, the company review all questions submitted today and will publish responses where appropriate to do so. These will be available via your investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. Just before diverting the attendees, Neil, perhaps I could just ask you just for a few closing comments.
Yes, just like to thank everybody for the time tonight. I know that it's a busy world we live in at the moment, but hopefully we've excited you with the range of opportunities that we have in front of us, the scale of the opportunity, and also how the team is delivering on that. So thank you very much, everyone.
That's fantastic. Neil, Chris, Stephen, thank you again for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session and should be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and is greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of VERSARIEN PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That concludes today's session. Thank you and good evening.